How long can you pretend you're not in love before it eats you alive? I'm Crush. Welcome to BL Paglu, the corner of YouTube where boys' love meets fate, feelings, and just a dash of ineffable chaos. They stopped Armageddon, but couldn't stop falling for each other. In Let There Be Us, we follow an angel and a demon trying to pretend they're just friends. One avoids it with sarcasm, the other with scones. But longing always finds a way. Through dances, jealous glares, and stolen touches, love sneaks in. Ready for quiet confessions and world-shattering kisses? Then grab your tea, light a candle, and let's begin. This is Crush. This is Let There Be Us. Chapter 1. Just Dinner. It had started, Aziraphale supposed, sometime after the non-apocalypse. Not with grand gestures or revelatory proclamations, but with a quiet dinner. And then another. And then another after that. Tonight was, if his mental tally was correct, their 7th such evening. Not that it was a ritual, exactly. And certainly not a date. No, nothing of the sort. Just two longtime companions enjoying a meal. Companionship, that's what it was. Well earned after stopping Armageddon and managing to stay relatively unbothered by both heaven and hell for now. Crowley, naturally, had insisted on picking the venue again. A dim, softly lit restaurant tucked behind a shuttered record shop, far too charming to be accidental. The kind of place that looked effortless, but was probably booked out for months. Crowley always had a knack for finding these little holes in the wall, as he called them. He stood near the entrance when Aziraphale arrived, all angles and dark clothing and a faint scowl that didn't quite hide the way he seemed to brighten on sight. "You're late," Crowley said, though he wasn't. "They'll give away the table." "Oh hush," Aziraphale replied with a sniff. "You made the reservation under Bentley, didn't you?" "I'm fairly sure it's still yours." Crowley smirked. "S'pose you'd like to do the talking then." "As long as you don't flirt with the waiter again," Aziraphale muttered under his breath, breezing inside. The table was in the corner, private, candlelit, charmingly domestic. The waitress greeted them like regulars, placing their usual wine order without even checking. Aziraphale didn't question it. He didn't want to question it. Routine was comfortable. "You've got sauce on your sleeve," Crowley noted dryly, gesturing with a fork halfway through the main course. "I most certainly do not," Aziraphale replied, glancing down and then hurriedly dabbing at the offending stain. "It's paprika reduction. Quite fashionable." Crowley made a noise, part chuckle, part sigh, and shook his head fondly. They bantered, as always. Crowley complained about modern architects. Aziraphale defended the charm of overgrown ivy and half-flooded bookstores. Crowley rolled his eyes when Aziraphale described an especially thrilling 1830s ledger he'd restored. Aziraphale rolled his entire head when Crowley told a story about chasing a demonic pigeon out of his window using a broom and 2 small miracles. It was easy, familiar, old, like they'd been doing this for centuries, and in some ineffable way they had. By dessert, Aziraphale was glowing slightly, wine-warmed and full. He didn't even mind that Crowley had, once again, ordered cinnamon brulee despite claiming to despise cinnamon. With a little laugh, spooning into the soft custard and cracking the caramelized top with practiced delight. "You really should just admit you like it." Crowley leaned back, his sunglasses perched low on his nose, gaze hidden. "I hate it," he said. "Hate the taste. Then why order it every time?" A shrug. "You like it." Aziraphale smiled vaguely, focusing on the plate. Crowley watched him eat, and tried, very hard, not to. There was something about the way Aziraphale closed his eyes ever so slightly with the first bite, how he cradled the spoon like it was the holiest of sacraments, how a pleased little hum slipped out before he remembered himself. Crowley looked away. Then back. Then away again. Stomach fluttered. Annoyingly. Like something winged and uninvited had made its home somewhere between his ribs and his spine. Bloody dessert. Bloody angel. Aziraphale, oblivious, spooned up another bite and pushed the plate halfway toward Crowley. You'll change your mind eventually, dear. Crowley froze. Aziraphale didn't. He went right on eating, licking the back of the spoon delicately, mumbling something about nutmeg undertones and caramelized sugar. He hadn't noticed. Crowley sat perfectly still, fingers tightening around the stem of his wine glass. His ears rang, just faintly. The words still echoed. Dear. He wasn't going to make a thing out of it. Wasn't going to mention it. That would be ridiculous. But he watched Aziraphale finish the dessert with the expression of someone who had accidentally caught a sunrise. The walk back was damp and golden. Rain had passed through earlier, leaving the streets shiny and slick. Aziraphale's coat fluttered behind him slightly as he walked, his hands tucked neatly behind his back. Crowley trailed beside him, silent for once. Brooding, perhaps. Or thinking. It was always hard to tell the difference. When they reached the bookshop, Aziraphale paused. It was the same as always, the hesitation at the door, the quiet wondering if this night should stretch just a bit longer. Tea, he offered, glancing sideways. Crowley shook his head. Should go. Got a thing. A thing. Yeah. Plants need swearing at. You know how it is. Aziraphale smiled. Of course. Crowley stepped backward, as if waiting for the moment to close itself. Next week, then? Aziraphale asked lightly. Crowley tilted his head. You free Tuesday? Aziraphale smiled. I could be. Good, Crowley muttered. I've got something else to show you. Not a date, obviously. Obviously, Aziraphale agreed, heart tapping a little too loudly in his chest. Chapter 2. Coffee and Confessions. Crowley hadn't meant to stand in front of the bookshop for 5 whole minutes after Aziraphale went inside. He'd meant to walk off, sunglasses on, collar up, dramatic exit. But his feet hadn't moved. Not really. Just hovered on the edge of the pavement like they were waiting for something. A second invitation, maybe. A glance back through the glass. A reason. He scoffed quietly to himself and turned sharply on his heel, muttering, Get it together, you ridiculous bastard. The Bentley purred awake as soon as he got close, headlights blinking like a bored cat. He slid inside and immediately regretted how warm it was. Too warm. Or maybe he was too warm. That bloody dessert. That bloody angel. Dear, Crowley muttered, voice dripping sarcasm as he yanked the car into gear. You'll change your mind eventually, dear. He mimicked Aziraphale's soft lilt, exaggerated it, winced at himself. He hadn't meant to stare. He never did. But the way Aziraphale ate things, it was practically obscene. Reverent. Like food had never disappointed him. Like every bite was a love letter from the universe. Crowley hated it. Except he didn't. And now he couldn't stop thinking about the way that single, stupid word had slipped out. Dear. Like it meant nothing. It had meant everything to him. He needed to cool off. Maybe not literally. But he needed something grounding, something bitter. Crowley parked the Bentley in its usual illegal spot and ducked into the warm glow of Nina's cafe. The bell over the door jingled with unearned cheer. She looked up from behind the counter, where she was wiping down espresso machines with the intensity of someone trying to scrub out a memory. You're out late, she said, eyeing him over the mugs. You don't do decaf. Didn't say I was here for me, Crowley muttered, tugging off his gloves. Might be going back over to the bookshop. Figured I'd bring something. She snorted, eyebrow, and started grinding beans anyway. You don't have to pretend, you know, she said, casually. I've seen the way you look at him. Crowley opened his mouth, closed it, and scowled. I do not. You do, Nina said firmly, passing him a to-go cup with an eyebrow raised. It's not a bad thing. It's just obvious. He took the cup and didn't meet her eyes. Well, it's not like he knows. Nina tilted her head. Are you sure about that? Crowley didn't answer. She leaned on the counter slightly, voice softer. Look, I don't know what celestial immortal being rules you two live by, but if anyone ever looked at me the way you look at him when he's talking about pastries, I'd marry them on the spot. Crowley blinked, caught somewhere between horror and laughter. He talks about pastries a lot. Exactly, she grinned. You're in deep. He groaned and ran a hand through his hair. Nina shrugged. You want advice? No, Crowley lied. Confess under the rain, I saw it in a movie recently, she said anyway. It's cinematic. You two have the whole Victorian pining thing going. Might as well lean in. Crowley took a long, dramatic sip of the coffee to hide the burning in his face. I'm not confessing anything. I'm not. Then why are you buying late-night drinks and circling the block like a lost crow? He glared. You're getting real smug, MacGuffin. She smiled, unbothered. That's because I'm right. Outside, the clouds were already regrouping overhead, and a slow, steady drizzle had started again, soft, misty, but persistent. The kind of rain London liked best. Crowley leaned against the Bentley's hood in front of his own apartment, still clutching the warm milk cup that he for some reason was too nervous to bring to Aziraphale, half tempted to chuck it at a wall just to shake off the nerves curling in his stomach. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't flustered. He was Crowley. He tempted demons, snapped at archangels, shouted down Satan, and survived standing on holy ground while calling heaven a bunch of bastards. He did not get jittery over dessert spoons and nicknames and the shape of Aziraphale's smile. He definitely didn't almost drop the cup when his phone buzzed. Aziraphale. Could you come over? I need your help with something. Crowley stared at the message, then reread it. Twice. The drizzle thickened into something just short of proper rain, misting over his glasses. He slid back into the Bentley without answering, heart pounding for reasons he refused to name. Chapter 3. The Outfit Incident. Crowley had broken several minor speed laws on the way to the bookshop. He wouldn't admit it, of course, not out loud, but the second that message came in, the panic had set in fast and hard. Could you come over? I need your help with something. It was the kind of sentence that felt like it might be followed by I'm being exiled or heaven found us or my shop is burning down in a holy fire. So yes, he may have swerved a little. By the time he'd arrived at the shop's door, breath-tight and heart-racing, he was already preparing a miracle or three. Only for Aziraphale to open the door in his dressing gown and say, in that maddeningly calm voice, I need help picking out something to wear. Crowley stared at him. What? For the art exhibition tomorrow. I simply can't decide on a jacket, and the color of the waistcoat really matters, don't you think? The demon stood frozen on the threshold, still half prepared to wrestle an archangel. You texted me like the world was ending. For fashion advice? Aziraphale blinked at him innocently. Well, you are the fashionable one. Crowley wanted to scream. Or lie down. Or both. 20 minutes later, he was still internally spiraling as Aziraphale fluttered around the back room, pulling waistcoats and jackets from unseen drawers like some kind of well-dressed magician. Crowley sat slouched in one of the armchairs, legs stretched long in front of him, the drink gone cold in his hand. He was trying very hard not to stare. Or think. Or exist. You didn't have to rush, you know, Aziraphale said cheerfully from behind a large bookcase. It's not until tomorrow evening. You sent a panic text, Crowley muttered. I asked for help, Aziraphale said brightly. That's practically the same thing, he grumbled. A jacket came flying out from behind the shelf and landed on the floor. I've narrowed it down to 2, Aziraphale called. One has that very subtle embroidery on the collar you remember, from that little tailor in Vienna, and the other has a softer drape, very flattering. I thought I might try them both on and see which feels more. Crowley wasn't listening anymore, because just through the slats of the tall bookshelf, he caught the briefest glimpse of movement, pale skin, the flutter of linen slipping off a shoulder. And then again, through a wider gap, a bare arm. Aziraphale. Crowley's mouth went dry instantly. He shouldn't look. Obviously. But his eyes betrayed him. Another angle. Aziraphale had his back to the gap now, reaching for the waistcoat. The soft, rounded line of his shoulder, the curve of his side, Crowley looked away. Immediately looked back. His brain short-circuited somewhere between Dear Satan and Don't Be Creepy, while his trousers became noticeably less comfortable. Hell. Literally hell. He shifted in his seat, pressing his knees together and attempting to think about absolutely anything else. Nuclear fission, fire ants, the time Gabriel made a pun. But then Aziraphale's shirt slid down his back entirely, and Crowley got an unfiltered view of the curve of his spine, pale and soft and real. He was going to combust. Or implode. Or commit a minor crime against time and space. Crowley. Aziraphale's voice floated out, entirely oblivious. Are you quite all right out there? Why yeah, he croaked, half-joked. Fine. Great. Definitely not dying. You're being awfully quiet. Because I'm watching you through a bookshelf like a perverted Victorian ghost. Just concentrating, he managed, voice cracking. More fabric rustled. And then, oh, do close your eyes for a moment, Aziraphale said, cheerfully. I want to do a little reveal. Crowley slapped a hand over his eyes like they'd betrayed him personally. His whole body was hot, uncomfortable, throbbing with questions he wasn't prepared to face. He heard soft footsteps. All right, Aziraphale said proudly. You can look now. Crowley hesitated, then lowered his hand. Aziraphale stood there, beaming, dressed in a deep plum waistcoat over a cream shirt that hugged his frame surprisingly well, paired with tailored gray trousers and a pocket watch that glinted softly in the lamplight. Crowley stared. It was not, strictly speaking, a seductive outfit. But it looked good. Too good. He didn't know how to say that without sounding like he was about to eat his own tie. Well? Aziraphale prompted, clearly expecting commentary. Crowley cleared his throat twice and dragged a hand through his hair. You look fine. Fine? Aziraphale echoed, lips pursing. Smart. Nice. Artsy. Whatever. He waved a hand and tried not to make eye contact. It works. Aziraphale smiled, pleased. Excellent. I thought the plum brought out my, well, it doesn't matter. Crowley groaned internally and stood up, mostly to stop thinking about plum, and brought out in the same sentence. Glad I could help, he muttered, already backing toward the front door. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to go stick my head in a freezer. What? Nothing. Good night. Aziraphale blinked, puzzled. You're leaving. Crowley paused at the door. If I don't, I might say or do something stupid. And before Aziraphale could ask what that meant, he slipped out the door and into the night, face burning, heart thudding, trousers cursed. Chapter 4. Art, Interference, and a Text Message. Aziraphale had spent far too long adjusting his waistcoat before leaving the bookshop. It was entirely Crowley's fault, really, ever since last night. The demon had been acting odd. Not distant, but not exactly close either. Like a rubber band stretched too far. Taut. Twitchy. He'd left in a rush, muttering something about needing air. And yet, when Aziraphale called him this afternoon to come with him to the art exhibition, Crowley had sounded like nothing was amiss. I'll be there, he'd said over the line. Might be late. Stuff to handle. Of course, Aziraphale had replied politely. No rush truly. I'll be with Nina and Maggie. Right, anyways, sorry I left last night. Just needed air. Crowley had said. Aziraphale hesitated. That's quite all right, dear. You did help. Immensely. And I did ask rather late. A long pause. Crowley hummed, See you soon, Angel. The gallery was tastefully lit, filled with a pleasant hum of chatter and the faint clink of champagne glasses. Aziraphale arrived with Maggie and Nina, who looked effortlessly cool as usual, Maggie in a loose shirt with rolled sleeves, Nina in a fitted black blazer that somehow screamed, I know what I'm talking about, and I'm judging your wine choices. I still think this is totally a date, Maggie whispered as they stepped inside. It's not, Aziraphale insisted, smoothing his waistcoat again. Nina passed him a smirk. But you dressed like it was. Before Aziraphale could form a rebuttal, a man with perfectly tousled hair and an expensive-looking scarf stepped into his periphery. "Excuse me," the stranger said, flashing a curated smile. "I couldn't help but notice you admiring the Cariani." Aziraphale gave a polite nod. "Ah yes, Venetian school. Lovely brushwork." He studied under Bellini, but "I was more admiring you," the man cut in, stepping just a fraction too close. Aziraphale blinked. "Oh well, that's very forward of you." "I'm a direct sort of person," the man said smoothly, eyes scanning Aziraphale in a way that made him shift uncomfortably. Maggie caught Nina's arm a few feet away. "You seeing this?" Nina narrowed her eyes. "Oh, hell no." Without missing a beat, she pulled out her phone and typed, "Mobile phone text to Crowley. You better get here fast, someone's hitting on your angel." Crowley was halfway to the exhibition when the message came in. He read it once, then again. He muttered something about murder being technically off the table and bolted for the exhibition. Meanwhile, Aziraphale was doing his best to politely edge away from the stranger. "I really must get back to my friends." "Just one question," the man said, leaning in slightly. "Are you actually taken, or are you just trying to let me down easy?" Aziraphale opened his mouth, unsure what to say. "Well, Excuse me." The words weren't loud, but they hit like thunder. The stranger turned and paled. Crowley stood a few feet away, hair wind-tossed, glasses slightly askew, wearing his usual black on black like a walking bad omen. His eyes, though hidden behind lenses, burned. He didn't even look at the man. He walked straight to Aziraphale. And then, with slow, unshakable confidence, he slipped one hand around Aziraphale's waist. His fingers were cold, sharp, deliberate. Aziraphale stiffened slightly at the sudden contact, breath catching in his throat. The chill of Crowley's touch sent a strange shiver down his spine, and not just because of temperature. Something was different. The air around them thickened, subtle but unmistakable. The kind of pressure that made people instinctively step back. A hush fell over their corner of the room. The stranger blinked, took a single step back, and mumbled, "Right. Sorry," before disappearing into the crowd. Aziraphale didn't move. Crowley's fingers were still resting at his waist, like a claim he didn't realize he'd made. Aziraphale turned his head slightly, voice soft. "Dear?" Crowley didn't answer immediately, but Aziraphale could feel it, the tight coil of something just under the surface. Possessiveness, jealousy, want, and behind it, something darker, not threatening, but old. Heavy. He glanced down at the hand, still on his waist. Crowley followed his gaze, then pulled it back slowly, fingers brushing against the fabric like they didn't want to leave. "Sorry," he muttered, stepping just half a pace away. "No," Aziraphale said, quietly. "It's all right." Neither of them said anything else. But the space between them buzzed with something unspoken and wholly undeniable. Chapter 5: The Ride, the Bar, and the Fall. Crowley had never been great at controlling his impulses. He liked to tell himself it was because of all the years he'd spent rebelling, the centuries spent being everything heaven and hell didn't want. That was his excuse, his justification. But tonight? Tonight he could barely breathe without thinking about Aziraphale. It wasn't that the angel was doing anything particularly notable. No, it was more like Aziraphale was being himself, and that was enough to turn Crowley's world upside down. First, there was the way Aziraphale refused to look him in the eye after that incident in the gallery. Even now, as they wandered slowly among the modernist sculptures, Aziraphale seemed intent on studying the walls, the floor, anything but Crowley. Crowley kept his hands in his pockets, walking just a fraction too close, as if proximity might force the words to tumble out of his mouth. But they didn't. Instead, it felt like 1,000 things unsaid piled up between them, and neither of them could be bothered to start the conversation. Aziraphale kept adjusting his coat, a nervous habit Crowley was now all too familiar with. And Crowley, the damned demon, couldn't stop his mind from wandering, from imagining all the stupid things he should say to clear the air. But what would he say? Are we really this close now? Does it make you uncomfortable, too? Instead, they wandered in silence. It wasn't until they were back outside, on the dark streets of London, that Nina's voice cut through the stillness, breaking Crowley's spiraling thoughts. Are you two really not dating? She asked, half teasing, half exasperated. Crowley blinked, caught off guard. He hadn't even realized she'd been observing them. She was leaning casually against the side of the Bentley, arms crossed. Maggie, of course, was standing beside her, wearing that knowing grin. No, Crowley said stiffly, crossing his arms. We're just friends, old ones. Sure, Nina said with a raised brow, clearly unconvinced. Just don't keep pretending you don't want to be more than that. I'm not pretending, Crowley muttered. But his fingers lingered on the cool door handle of the Bentley, resisting the urge to open the door too quickly. Aziraphale, on the other hand, stood awkwardly to the side, his expression unreadable. Maggie, noticing the angel's discomfort, smirked. Are you sure you're not falling for him? She asked, her voice pitched low enough that only Aziraphale could hear. Aziraphale flushed, but before he could respond, Crowley finally opened the door. Right. Enough of this. Let's go for a ride, yeah. The car hummed to life, its familiar purr vibrating beneath Crowley's seat. He glanced over at Aziraphale, who had already adjusted himself, staring out the window, hands neatly folded in his lap. Crowley turned his attention back to the road, but couldn't help noticing how perfectly the angel fit into the sleek leather interior of the Bentley. It's a lovely car, Aziraphale murmured after a while, his voice soft and almost wistful. I know, Crowley replied, his lips curling into a smirk. Only the best. Aziraphale smiled faintly but said nothing more, and Crowley focused on driving, trying to push the words that kept nagging at him to the back of his mind. They drove aimlessly, winding their way through the dark streets until the car slowed and came to a stop near a quiet, dimly lit bar tucked away in a forgotten alley. The music from inside was mellow, jazz-heavy, the kind of place where nobody asked questions and the drinks kept coming until the early morning hours. Crowley looked over at Aziraphale. The angel was still in his own world, eyes scanning the bar's exterior with curiosity. Here's as good a place as any, Crowley said, unbuckling his seatbelt. Let's go inside. Aziraphale hesitated, then nodded, and they both climbed out. Inside, the atmosphere was calm. A soft piano played in the background, the clink of glasses a gentle accompaniment. Crowley noticed that, despite the surroundings, Aziraphale looked strangely at ease. The music seemed to relax him, his shoulders dropping as he took in the dimly lit space. After a round of drinks at the bar, Aziraphale leaned back in his chair with a sigh, clearly pleased with the quiet, unassuming nature of the place. This place has charm, Aziraphale commented. I can see why you like it. Crowley smirked, leaning back in his own chair. Told you. It's good for getting lost in. Now, let's see if they've got anything better than your usual tea. Aziraphale gave a mock gasp, clutching his chest. You wound me, Crowley. Crowley raised his glass in a silent toast. After a few rounds of drink, Aziraphale stood up to grab another round from the bar. When he returned to the table, a few drinks in hand, he was swaying a little. Crowley sat up straighter to help, but before he could do anything, Aziraphale slipped. The angel's legs gave way, and with a startled gasp, he fell, directly onto Crowley's lap, their drinks falling around them somewhere. Crowley froze. Aziraphale blinked, his face flushed with a mix of embarrassment and drunken confusion. Oh, dear. Crowley's heart rate immediately spiked. Aziraphale, get up, he muttered, trying to push him off. But Aziraphale, too drunk to really understand, simply wobbled and tried to move back, but failed. Instead, he collapsed against Crowley's chest, his hands grabbing onto the demon's shoulders to steady himself. Crowley exhaled sharply. His hands went to Aziraphale's waist, a desperate, instinctive attempt to keep him from tipping over. Further, he could feel the heat of Aziraphale's body, the soft curve of his waist under his fingers, and the strange pressure that made his pants suddenly feel too tight. "Get up! Get up!" his brain screamed. He couldn't stop staring at the angel's flushed face, his breath uneven. Crowley's own heartbeat was erratic, painfully fast. "Aziraphale, come on," Crowley growled, feeling his pulse thrum in his throat. "Stop moving." "I'm trying," Aziraphale slurred, still trying to shift away, but his body wasn't cooperating. Instead, he fell back onto Crowley, pushing their faces closer than ever. Crowley couldn't take it anymore. He held Aziraphale's waist with more force, his fingers digging into the fabric of the angel's jacket, and gently helped him sit up. The air felt thick, suffocating, with the sudden need to pull Aziraphale closer, and yet Crowley had to fight it. Just stay still for a second," Crowley muttered, his own voice lower than he'd intended. The tension between them was unbearable, and yet the whole world seemed to fade around them. Aziraphale, too drunk to realize what was happening, simply smiled weakly, his head resting against Crowley's shoulder. And Crowley, despite everything, couldn't bring himself to move away. To be continued. And that's the end of part 1 of this story. Let There Be Us, a slow burn tale of love, longing, and everything in between. This is just the beginning, part 1 of a many-part video series exploring the journey of Aziraphale and Crowley as they stumble, fumble, and maybe finally find their way to each other. Thank you so much for watching. Your support means the world. If you felt the butterflies too, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for updates. The next chapter is coming soon, and trust me, things are about to get even more intense. Until then, let there be us. With love. Crush.